Krishna. Pujananda said he's going to help settle that whole thing. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Balaba Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Balaba Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Balaba Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Balaba Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Asatara Sadashri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shai Mukunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dhama Ki Jai. Mathura Dhama Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dhama Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dhama Ki Jai. Gangamaya Jamuna Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya. Krishna Prastaya Bhutale. Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Sarasvati Deve. Gauravani Pacharane. Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskachade Satarane. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvoitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Panchakalpajubhischa Kibhisnabhyavata Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnaveva Namo Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. September 6, 2020 in Hillsborough, North Carolina. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 20, which is the description of the rainy season and autumn, text 13. Jalasthalokasha sarve Navavari nisevaya Abhiran ruchiram rupam Yatahari nisevaya. Please chant. Jala, of the water, Sthala, and the land, Okashaha, the residence, Sarve, all, Nava, new, Vadi, of the water, Nisevaya, by taking recourse, Abhiran, they took on, Ruchiram, attractive, Rupam, form, Yata, just as, Hani Nisevaya, by rendering devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is going to be a beauty class. You see? Well, beauty class. Ruchi Ram Rupam. So anyone here who wants a Ruchi Ram Rupam, anyone who wants to have a beautiful form. So this is going to be our class in beauty advice. How to become beautiful. Everybody here want to be beautiful? Yes? And anybody here want to be ugly? No, you want to be ugly? I'm sure Krishna can arrange that if you like. But this is all about becoming beautiful. Ruchi Ram Rupa. Translation. As all creatures of the land and water took advantage of the newly fallen rainwater, their forms became attractive and pleasing, just as a devotee becomes beautiful by engaging in the service of the Supreme Lord. So the BBT purport is just quoting from Srila Prabhupada entirely. So we're going to just go to Light of the Bhagavata, text 10, and read the whole purport from there. And Srila Prabhupada's translation in Light of the Bhagavata is just as a living being attains a transcendentally attractive form by rendering service to Lord Hari, similarly, all the inhabitants of the land and the water assume beautiful forms by taking advantage of the newly fallen water. In Prabhupada's purport. And this first paragraph is the same as what's in the BBT. We have practical experience of this with our students in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Before becoming students, they were dirty-looking, although they had naturally beautiful personal features. But due to having no information of Krishna consciousness, they appeared very dirty and wretched. So Srila Prabhupada's first disciples, not wholly, but mostly, were hippies. Of course, the hippies didn't generally call themselves hippies. That was a term other people used. They called themselves members of the counterculture, or they called themselves freaks, but not usually hippies. And these people, Hare Krishna, had decided that they were going to drop out of society. What was it? Tune in, drop out, turn on, right? What was it? Tune in, turn on, drop out. Yeah, there we go. All right, so I had dropped out of society and were, basically they'd given up, they tried to give up Rajagun. They tried to give up the frantic ambition for money and status and family and all that kind of thing. And unfortunately, instead of taking to Sattvagun, they had taken to Tamagun. But it was influenced by India. You know, a lot of the counterculture people, a lot of the smoking of marijuana was influenced actually by India. And like if you go to Govardhan today, early in the morning, you'll see some of the so-called sadhus smoking marijuana. And, you know, having long, dirty hair and smoking marijuana and wearing beads. And so they had pulled from kind of this particular perversion of Indian so-called, you know, pseudo-spirituality. And so many of them looked very wretched. You know, they weren't bathing properly. They weren't combing their hair. And rejecting Rajagun and in rejecting family life, they hadn't all become brahmacharis. So rather they had taken up, what was the slogan? Make love, not war. Yes, make love, not war, which basically meant have illicit sex with anybody you could find. So that was the mood of, not all, but many of, like Jayananda wasn't in that category, but many of the very early disciples were in that category. So that was why Srila Prabhupada was writing this. They appeared very dirty and wretched. Since they have taken to Krishna consciousness, their health has improved. By the way, if you really want to read about this, you can read Chasing Rhinos with the Swami by Shyamasundar. Now, his account is very extreme. Please don't think that all of us who joined in the 60s and 70s were like that. I certainly was not. So, but we'll get it's extremely extreme, but it gives you some hint as to why Srila Prabhupada was writing this. Since they have taken to Krishna consciousness, their health has improved, and by following the rules and regulations, their bodily luster has increased. Now, when I was teaching the Gurukul here, some of my students, especially Amrita Radhe and Krishna, wanted to study Ayurveda. So I had a policy that I would teach within reason whatever elective my high school students wanted. And in order to teach Ayurveda, I had to study Ayurveda. So I ended up signing up with an Ayurvedic course where I was learning along with the students that I was teaching. And there you learn that our effulgence, all of us have some effulgence, it comes from proper digestion of healthy food. It gradually turns into ojas and tejas, which is what gives us our luster. Now this is a very interesting sentence. When they are dressed with saffron-colored cloth, now in those days, in the early days of ISKCON, everybody who wasn't married wore saffron, men, women, and we would just get, in those days there were not very many Indians in America, there were no Hindu temples, there were hardly Indian stores, so we would just buy saffron-colored polycotton cloth, or we'd buy cotton cloth and dye it tangerine with Rit dye. And they were very long, like a usual sari is 5 to 6 meters. We were getting 7 to 8. Now there's parts of India where they use 9 meters, but then they wear it like a dhoti also. So we were getting these very long meters. I was just seeing a photograph the other day of Prabhupada instructing Gauri Dasi in Didi worship, and her sari's pinned on her head like this. And the reason we pinned them is the cloth was so heavy. It was the only way to keep it on your head. And then we had like 25 pleats that, of course, dragged on the floor. And we had like a dirt border on the bottom of the sari. But anyway, so we were all wearing saffron. And anyone who got married wore yellow or sometimes white. So you see the old photographs. Everyone's wearing either saffron or yellow. And I just remember at 18, actually at 17, when I first put on this big saffron sari when I stayed overnight at the temple. And I remember walking down the stairs in the Evanston temple with these 25 pleats dragging on the floor and the sari pinned like this and thinking, I am so Vedic. I remember that very clearly. When they are dressed with saffron-colored cloth, with tilak on their foreheads and beads in their hands and on their necks, they look exactly as if they have come directly from Vaikuntha. Now, reading this, you might think that everyone in Vaikuntha wears saffron-colored cloth that they got from the local, fabric store, polycotton, or that they all put Rit tangerine dry in their laundry machines. So that's not what Srila Prabhupada is implying there. When we read the descriptions of the residents of Vaikuntha, some of them have forms like the Lord. They have Swarup Mukti. And the Lord does wear a kind of yellowish, saffronish garment. So some of them do wear like that. But there's also, Sanatana Goswami describes in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, I don't know if Dayavir Prabhu was listening, but the wonderful description when Gopakumar goes to Vaikuntha of the appearances of all the residents of Vaikuntha. If you haven't read it, please read it. It's amazing. And they're not all wearing saffron cloth. But Prabhupada's talking about the mood of the devotees, that they're looking so beautiful and so effulgent that they all look like residents of the spiritual world. Okay, now that part's in the BBT edition, but this next paragraph is only in light of the Bhagavata. The residents of the water are the fish, frogs, and so on, and the residents of the land are the cows, deer, and so on, because the verse says, both the residents in the water and the residents of the land became beautiful with the rain. By constantly drinking and taking bath in the fresh water of the rainy season, the tired and parched animals are refreshed, and their complexions become brilliant, as their health is invigorated by the arrival of new rainwater. So we all know that if we drink enough water, and if we drink enough fresh, pure water, our health is greatly improved, isn't it? Right? One of my friends some months ago complained to me that she was having various health problems, and I said, are you drinking enough water? And she said, no, because I'm in a situation where it's very awkward for me to use the bathroom where I'm working. I never want to go use the bathroom. And because I never want to use the bathroom, I'm not drinking enough water. And I said, well, if you're going to be dehydrated, you're going to have all these problems. We were talking the other day about some pujaris, right, who, because they don't want to use the bathroom, they're not drinking any water till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then over time, their health deteriorates. They end up having kidney problems and so many things because of being dehydrated. So to drink a lot of fresh, clean water is going to invigorate one's health. The lakes, ponds, and rivers are cleansed and invigorated by the downpour of new rainwater and thus become most beautiful. So the creatures of the water become beautiful, the creatures of the land become beautiful, and the water itself becomes beautiful. Similarly, and you'll notice in the verse, if you go back up to the verse, can we go back up to the verse? Yeah. No, the Sanskrit. Sanskrit for 13. Okay, so you see the word yata? So that means just as. A very, very common Sanskrit word. So similarly, a devotee of the Supreme Lord who takes advantage of the beautiful and invigorating downpour of the transcendental descriptions of God find in the Vedic literature. So the rain is compared to what? Should I read it again? Similarly, a devotee of the Supreme Lord who takes advantage of the beautiful and invigorating downpour of the transcendental descriptions of God found in the Vedic literature. So what's the rain being compared to? The transcendental descriptions of God. So when we're studying the Vedic literature, it's as if we're in a metaphorical rainy season. And we're getting these, and Prabhupada's calling them what? What's his adjectives for this rain? Beautiful and invigorating. Because we have again in the Sanskrit that's again disappeared. Why we keep going to the next verse? We're not on that verse. We're on this verse. Okay, so we have Ruchiram, attractive. So Nava is new. Anyway, just pretend it's up there. So Nava is new and Ruchiram is attractive. So this Prabhupada is comparing the rain of the transcendental vibrations of the pastimes of the Lord as being very beautiful. Right? Do we often talk about that? The beautiful pastimes of the personality of Godhead. They're full of beauty. And also, what's the other word? Invigorating. Invigorating. They give one vigor. Which of the opulences, which of the 6 opulences is related to vigor? Strength, yes. Sanskrit? No. Good guess. But what Sanskrit word is usually used for one of the 6 opulences that's strength? Related to the word vigor. Virya. And which of the 6 opulences is about beauty? Shri. By the way, Shri is often associated with the feminine and Virya often with the masculine. Yes. So interesting. Beautiful and invigorating pastimes of the Lord. So similarly, a devotee of the Supreme Lord who takes advantage of the beautiful and invigorating downpour of the transcendental descriptions of God found in the Vedic literature finds his spiritual consciousness invigorated and refreshed. So we can remember this, by the way, whenever it rains. There's many descriptions where we can connect our experience in the world and in daily life to Krishna consciousness. And whenever it rains, we can think, there's also a rain of the pastimes of the Lord that, what is it again, the adjectives? invigorating and beautiful. And it's like that, isn't it? When it rains, everything becomes invigorated and everything becomes beautiful. And we become, what do we become? Invigorated and refreshed. And what part of us becomes invigorated and refreshed? Not repressed. Our spiritual consciousness, our awareness. Have we found that? Right? I was speaking to someone the other day who was saying that they weren't feeling very invigorated or refreshed. They were feeling kind of worn out and down, and maybe they were repressed. And I said, the cure is Shastra. Shastra can take you from repressed to refreshed. I hadn't planned that. That was Krishna did that one. That wasn't part of my planning. Yeah. Right? Do we have that experience? I wrote an article about this for Back to Godhead eons ago. About how when we read the pastimes of the Lord, when we study the pastimes of the Lord, right, instead of being depressed and repressed, and then we feel what? Refreshed and invigorated. Don't we feel that way even when we shower? Right? It's a hot day, and we take a shower. I have some PTSD about cold showers, but anyway, from some ISKCON experiences. But, I mean, isn't that how we feel? I can take a shower. Right? I was reading the other day, my grandson-in-law has gotten me, have some interest in military things. So I was reading the other day about the experience of Navy SEALs and how they go through this thing called Hell Week, when they're always dirty and wet. And then this one guy describes finally he was allowed to take a shower, that was a hot shower, and put on clean clothes, and was like, oh. So hearing the pastimes of the Lord, right? We have so many things in this world, the activities of our lovely politicians, the activities of the lovely scientists, the activities of the lovely business persons and agriculturists, and the activities of the lovely entertainers and artisans. And they're all awful, isn't it? The scientists, the philosophers, the intellectuals, they're preaching atheistic philosophies. The politicians are trying to get as much money and power as they can at the expense of the citizens. The business people are cheating everybody, giving inferior products just to make a little bit of money for themselves. The artisans are doing inferior work. The artisans are supposed to produce functionality and beauty in society. They're producing dysfunction and ugliness, right? Just so they can make some more money. And it's so depressing. And then we read the pastimes of the Lord, and we're like, wow. And Prabhupada's last sentence here, in this way, his spiritualized body becomes very beautiful. So we talked about this a little bit the other day, that when you put iron into a fire, if you've ever seen a blacksmith, we used to see them at the state fair, and you put the iron into the fire, and the iron becomes so hot, anything you touch it to burns, just like fire. So Srila Prabhupada's talking about becoming radiant and healthy in our service externally, and also our spiritual body becoming beautiful. So in Sanatana Goswami's commentary, he says that this beauty comes to the sadhaka, but it also comes to those who are more advanced, and their tears of love make them very beautiful. Of course, we can think of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose tears of love were squirting out during the Rath Yatra, right? And bathing everybody. And the Lord's form was becoming more and more beautiful by his ecstasies. We were reading at Radhastami about how Srimati Radharani's body is ornamented by these ecstatic symptoms. I remember Ravinda Swarup Prabhu saying that pretty much all brides look beautiful because they're so happy. Actually, Sukra Acharya in the Bhagavatam says you're allowed to lie at a wedding, and the commentators say the lie you're allowed to say is you're allowed to tell the bride and groom how beautiful they are, even if they're not. Now, not the day after the wedding, but on the wedding day, you can say. Right? So happiness makes one beautiful, isn't it? And therefore, having these ecstatic symptoms makes one beautiful, Sanatana Goswami says. Jiva Goswami says that drinking the nectar of the Bhagavatam in the uncertain smoke of fruitive activities makes one beautiful. He talks about the sages of Namasharanya, who says, we're being blackened by this smoke of these uncertain fruitive activities. And drinking the nectar, we have this liquid allegory. Pibanti bhagavata atmana satam. Pibanti means to drink. We often have this, yes? Nectar is a liquid. We have Lord Chaitanya flooding the world, and this brings us beauty. So this spiritualized body, I want to talk briefly about this spiritualized body. And I was so enlivened to read this particular purport because it's directly related to I hope, please, Krishna, a major breakthrough that we're having with some research. And I'm really hoping we'll be able to fulfill one of Srila Prabhupada's cherished desires in our ISKCON society by looking at this idea of the spiritualized body. So I'm just going to give a little hint. So we have a verse that Srila Prabhupada likes to quote a lot. This is from the Hari Bhakti Vilas 2:12. And you'll notice it has a word that's also in the Sanskrit. Yata, yata, see? Yata kanchanatvam yati kumsyam rasa vihanataha tata diksha vihanena dvijatvam jayate nirnam. Kanchana, what does kanchana mean? Gold. Yata kanchana tam yati. Samsam rasa vidhanataha. So rasa also means something that's done in alchemy. So rasa can mean the taste you get from food, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, astringent. Rasa means what happens in proper digestion. We were talking about ojas and tejas. Rasa means relationship according to the 5 factors of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But in alchemy, it also means mercury, because mercury is a liquid. It's a liquid. And Prabhupada talks about the alchemy process of turning things into gold. Don't try this. But he talks about there's ways you can ingest mercury and then urinate on bell metal and turn it into gold. Do not try this. It could kill you. So, yata kanchana tam yati kumsham rasa vidhanatha. Just like bell metal is traditionally used to make cartels. And when you hear cartels made with bell metal, they sound beautiful. Most of the cartels we buy now are not made with bell metal, and they sound awful. I have some bell metal cartels that I keep in Govardhan. That was given to me by a devotee, Vidagda Madhava Das, who's a connoisseur of bell metal cartels. That is his specialty. So it doesn't become exactly gold. It doesn't become kanchana. It becomes kanchanatam. It becomes like gold. It becomes goldish. Tata, in the same way, yata, just as tata, in the same way, diksha, viranena, by diksha, by initiation, dvija tvam. What does dvija mean? Twice born. Dvi means two, ja means birth. Dvija. Dvija also refers to what kind of animal? Birds. Because the bird gives birth to an egg, and then the egg hatches. So 2 births. Egg birth and hatch birth. Dvija. Dvija tvam. Tvam means like nests. You get dvija nests. Right? What do we sing in the Guru Vastika every day? With uses twam. Second to last verse. Kintu Prabhurya Priyavitas. So he's like, what is it? Anyway, lost the word. Is like Hari. It's not that the Guru is Hari, but he's like Hari. So it's not that one by Diksha becomes exactly a Dvija in the technical Vedic sense. But one who takes initiation gets Dvijatwam, gets Dvijaness. Jayate Niram. Jayate means arises. Nirnam means in people. So just as bell metal attains kanchanata, goldness, similarity to gold, by following the procedures of alchemy, similarly by following the process of diksha, dvijatwam, dvijaness, similarity to twice-born individuals arises in humans. So we've had some difficulty in that a long time ago in India, those who were born brahmanas, those who had the jati, the birth as brahmanas, would complain that the devotees who were doing deity worship were not qualified. They said they're not born in Brahmin families. So these Jati Goswai Brahmanas, they come from Brahmana lines. A devotee interviewed one of these people in South India about whether or not women could be Diksha gurus. And they like to just show a little bit of this person's response. They don't show the rest of it, because in the rest of it, he says, actually, the only people who can become gurus are those who are Jati Gosai, those who are born in Brahmana families. He said, just like a dog, this is what he said. He said, just like a purebred dog has a pedigree. That's what he said. You can trace back their ancestry. So somebody who's a Diksha guru, they should be able to trace back their ancestry like a dog. That's what he said. It was when Sri Vaishnava, big Sri Vaishnava authority, when the devotee said, can women be Diksha gurus? He says, no. The only people who can become Diksha gurus are men who have this family pedigree like a dog. They released a video of just him saying, no, the women can't do it. And they cut out the part where he said the only people who can do it are men who are in this Jati Gosai and have this pedigree. They didn't show that part, because if they showed that part, it would be obvious that they weren't qualified by this standard either. So they only showed the part that like, when you take, I will tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, you cut out part of the truth. Anyway, so there were these Jati Gosai Brahmanas who were complaining that the Vaishnavas didn't have the right of worship. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati called his disciples who'd received Vaishnava Diksha Brahmanas. And we find Srila Prabhupada also talked about Brahminical initiation. But actually, Vaishnava Diksha has nothing to do with the Brahmana Varna. There's nothing whatsoever to do with the Brahmana Varna. In fact, Prabhupada says to call a Vaishnava Brahmana is offensive, because you're putting a material designation on it. So establishing Varnashrama means to look at what's your nature and what's your work in the world. So anyone can get Vaishnav Diksha and become a Vaishnav Dvija and become beautiful and invigorated. And such people who are Vaishnav Dvijas look just like residents of Vaikuntha, above all material designations, Sarvapadi Vinir Muktan. But in this world, they may have the nature and work of a Kshatriya. Kshatriya is supposed to have Ishwar above. A Brahmin is not supposed to have Ishwar above. That would be very unpalatable. Right? A Brahmin is supposed to be, yeah, sure, it's okay. You're forgiven, you're forgiven, you're forgiven, you're forgiven, you're forgiven, you're forgiven. And a Kshatriya sometimes is supposed to go, hey, you're not forgiven. You got to be punished. Right? A Vaishya is supposed to be more money, more money, more money, more money, more money. And a Brahmin is supposed to be, whatever's the basic necessities of life. So it's not that everyone who becomes a Vaishnav Dvija is going to have a Brahmana Varna nature or a Brahmana Varna work. You know, that was a preaching strategy of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to sometimes separate and sometimes conflate the Brahmana Varna with Vaishnav Diksha. But Vaishnav Diksha gives us Dvijatvam. It makes us like a Dvija. And even if you have the qualities in nature to do Shudra work, if you like to make things work and make things beautiful, we could use people like that here at New Goloka. We put out an advertisement. Can we please have people who know how to make things functional and beautiful? Yeah? Right? If you have a community and nobody knows how to make things work and beautiful, then how can anything go on? You know, everyone's sitting around reading the Bhagavatam and the walls are leaking. Right? But they can still be Vaishnav Dvija. They're not Shudras. They're Vaishnav Dvijas. They're chanting the Gayatri mantras. They're chanting the Brahma Gayatri mantras. But by their qualities and their livelihood, they like to make things functional and beautiful. And someone else, by their qualities and their livelihood, they want to just study the Shastras. And someone else, by their qualities and their livelihood, they want to make sure everyone has a nice place to stay and food to eat and water and education and protection. And someone else, by their qualities and livelihood, they want to make sure that the community is swimming in money and that there's food and that everything's wealthy and vibrant. But everybody becomes a Vaishnav Dvija. And when everyone becomes a Vaishnav Dvija, they are what again? Invigorated and refreshed and beautiful. Ruchiram Rupa. Ruchiram Rupa. One will look very beautiful. And everyone becomes transcendental to these material designations. It's just something we use in this world. One person has this car, one person has that car. So thank you very much for tolerating my revolutionary class. Questions? Maharaj definitely has a question. Very good. Or a comment or something. Ah.
So, when we're talking about the word Siddhanta, and in reference to female gurus, yes or no, does the word Siddhanta connect it with that, or is it?
So you're asking about.
Rather than a principle. So, does Siddhanta refer to principles, and does it refer to details?
Can Siddhanta refer to details? Well, like many words, it has different meanings in different contexts. The word, and we have in the hermeneutics materials, we have a whole section on Siddhanta, and the answer to your question that I can't give properly in 2 minutes is found there. So Siddhanta can be used in an ordinary sense, like, okay, we looked at 5 different greenhouses. What's your conclusion about which one we should buy? So it can be used in an ordinary sense just to be conclusion. Or, 2 people had a debate, what's the conclusion? What's the final decision? So it can be used in that ordinary sense. When it's used in a sense of Shastra, it means the condensed essence that's universally true at all places and all times and in all circumstances. So in this, we're looking at a Siddhanta that Sarvapadi Vinirmuktan Tatpartena Nirmala Rishikesha Rishikena Sevanam Bhakti Rutache. We're looking at the concept that Vaishnavas have nothing to do with material designations. That's a Siddhantic concept, that the jiva doesn't have a material designation and that spiritual realization has nothing to do with material designations. It also actually has to do, although I wasn't thinking of that quite honestly with today's class, that Vaishnav Diksha is not part of Varnashram at all. Getting Vaishnav Diksha does not give you a Varnashram designation, does not designate you a Varna Brahmana. Like Prabhupada gave Vaishnava Diksha to Jayananda, who built carts, drove a taxi, bought boga, took out the garbage, could barely pronounce Sanskrit. Right? He wasn't in the Brahmana Varna externally, but he was a Vaishnav Dvija. So those who give Vaishnav Diksha are not according to some kind of material designation, nor do those who receive it. They're not materially designated. So that is part of a principle of Siddhanta, yes.